Emily Hart had spent most of her 26 years navigating the ebb and flow of life in quiet endurance. Every morning, she tied on her worn apron, slipped into her sturdy but battered shoes, and walked the few blocks to Cornerstone Diner. The diner was tucked away on a bustling street, a relic of simpler times. Its neon sign flickered faintly, casting a soft glow that welcomed a steady stream of regulars. Construction workers, office employees, and travelers passing through. It was a place for everyone, yet no one stayed long enough to leave a mark. For Emily, the diner was her world. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was consistent. The customers were polite enough, and the work, though tiring, gave her a sense of purpose. But as she poured coffee, cleared tables, and greeted the regulars with a practiced smile, she often felt like she was living someone else's life, somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of routine and responsibility. A quiet voice whispered for something more. Emily's apartment was just a short walk away, a modest space with peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. The rent was reasonable, and it was home, but it often felt more like a waiting room for a life she couldn't yet afford. The evenings were the hardest. After her long shifts, she'd sit on the couch, the silence stretching around her like a second skin, and dream. She'd dream of faraway places, of doing something meaningful, of days without the weight of rent, bills, and uncertainty pressing down on her. These dreams felt impossibly distant, but they were hers, and she clung to them. One chilly afternoon, the diner was unusually quiet. The usual hum of conversation and clinking silverware had softened to a murmur. Emily, on her short break, slid into the booth in the far corner. From her bag, she unwrapped a simple sandwich she'd made that morning. It wasn't much, but it was enough to carry her through the rest of her shift. As she prepared to take a bite, moving outside the window caught her eye. A boy, no older than 10, stood on the other side of the glass. His clothes hung loosely on his small frame, and his face was pale and thin. But it was his eyes that struck her large, dark, and filled with the kind of hunger Emily recognized all too well. They weren't just hungry for food. They were hungry for care, for warmth, for a reprieve from whatever hardships had led him here. Without thinking, Emily waved him inside. The boy hesitated, glancing around nervously, but the kindness in her expression seemed to reassure him. Slowly, he pushed the door open and shuffled toward her booth. Emily smiled and slid half of her sandwich across the table. "Here," she said softly. "Eat up." The boy stared at the food for a moment, as if unsure it was real. Then, gingerly, he picked it up and began eating, his movements careful and deliberate, as though he was afraid it might vanish if he ate too quickly. Emily watched him, her heart swelling with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't mind skipping half her meal. Seeing the boy's relief was worth it. Unbeknownst to Emily, a man in a sharp navy suit sat at a booth across the room, observing the scene unfold. James Harrington was a man who noticed things, small details others overlooked. As he sipped his coffee, his piercing blue eyes followed Emily's every move. There was something about her quiet act of kindness that intrigued him. It wasn't performative. It was genuine, unselfish. In his world of corporate meetings and calculated deals, such purity was rare. The boy finished his meal, licking the crumbs from his fingers. He looked up at Emily, his expression shy but grateful. "Thank you," he whispered before sliding out of the booth and disappearing into the cold afternoon. Emily watched him go, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She didn't know his story or where he would go next, but she hoped her small gesture had brought him even a moment of comfort. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of orders and coffee refills, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the boy. When the diner finally closed, Emily walked home beneath the glow of streetlights. The city hummed around her, but her mind was quiet, lost in reflection. As she reached her apartment, she noticed an envelope slipped under her door. Her name was written on it in neat, cursive handwriting. Curious, she picked it up and stepped inside. Sitting on her couch, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Kindness doesn't go unnoticed." Thank you for caring even when no one else was watching. There was no name, no signature, no indication of who had sent it. She read the words again, her heart racing. Who had seen her? And why had they gone out of their way to leave this message? Emily folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, its weight lingering in her mind, in a world that often felt indifferent. The note was a reminder that her actions mattered, that even the smallest gestures could ripple outward in ways she couldn't predict. The next morning, Emily returned to the diner with a renewed sense of purpose. The note from the night before remained in her pocket, its words a quiet encouragement. The day unfolded as usual, but Emily couldn't help scanning the room, wondering if the mysterious sender might reveal themselves. It wasn't until lunchtime that her question was answered. The door swung open, and in walked the man in the navy suit. He moved with a quiet confidence, his sharp features softened by a faint smile as he looked around the room. When his eyes landed on Emily, something unspoken passed between them. He chose the same booth he'd occupied the day before, sitting down with an air of purpose. Emily approached, her curiosity barely concealed beneath her polite demeanor. "What can I get you today?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "A coffee, please," he replied, his tone calm but warm. His gaze lingered on her, as if searching for something beneath the surface. Emily nodded and turned toward the counter, her mind racing. Who was he? And why did it feel like he knew more about her than he let on? When she returned with his coffee, the man gave her a slight smile. "Thank you," he said, placing a generous tip on the table. Beneath it was another note, folded neatly. Emily waited until he had left before picking it up. This time, the message read, "Sometimes small acts lead to great changes." Her heart skipped a beat. The man in the suit wasn't just a customer. He was the one who had left the note at her door. As she finished her shift and walked home that evening, Emily's thoughts were a whirlwind. The man's words had stirred something within her, a sense that her life was on the verge of change, though she couldn't yet see what form it would take. The next morning at the Cornerstone Diner, Emily couldn't shake the thought of the man in the navy suit. His notes had left her intrigued, and for the first time in years, her routine felt alive with the promise of something unexpected. Who was he? Why had he noticed her? And what did he mean by great changes? The day passed with the usual flurry of orders, steaming coffee pots, and cheerful banter from the regulars. Yet, Emily found herself glancing at the door, half expecting the man to walk through it again. She told herself it was ridiculous. Why would someone like him take an interest in her? A waitress with a modest life and simple dreams? It wasn't until mid-afternoon that the door opened, and there he was. The man in the navy suit stepped inside, his presence commanding yet unassuming. He walked to the same booth, his movements deliberate, and sat down. Emily's pulse quickened, but she masked her nerves with a practiced smile as she approached him. "Coffee again?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Yes, please," he replied. His voice was calm, steady, but there was a warmth in his gaze that made Emily feel seen in a way she wasn't used to. She returned moments later with his coffee and placed it in front of him. For a moment, they were both silent. Then, to her surprise, the man spoke. "Emily," he said, her name rolling off his tongue with surprising familiarity. Her breath caught. "How do you know my name?" He offered a small smile. "I asked around. You've made quite the impression here." Emily tilted her head, unsure how to respond. "Why would you care about that?" He leaned forward slightly, his expression soft but intent. "I saw what you did for that boy the other day. It was a small act. Yes, but it carried so much meaning. You didn't hesitate, and you didn't expect anything in return. That's rare." Emily felt her cheeks flush. "It was just a sandwich," she said quietly. "It wasn't just a sandwich," he replied. "It was a moment of kindness, and that's something this world needs more of." His words lingered between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily's heart raced as she tried to understand his intentions. Before she could ask, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I want to offer you something," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "Open it when you're alone." Emily stared at the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she picked it up. "What is this?" she asked. her voice barely above a whisper. "An opportunity," he said simply, standing to leave. "You'll understand once you read it." Before she could respond, he gave her a parting nod and walked out of the diner, leaving her sitting in stunned silence. That evening, back in her small apartment, Emily sat at her kitchen table with the envelope in front of her. The air felt charged, as though her life were teetering on the edge of something monumental. Taking a deep breath, she opened the envelope and unfolded the handwritten letter inside. The letter revealed that the man was James Harrington, a billionaire philanthropist and CEO of Harrington Enterprises. He had been inspired by her act of kindness and wanted to offer her a position at his foundation, which focused on helping underprivileged communities. The role would involve working directly with him to develop programs that made a tangible difference in people's lives. But that wasn't all. Enclosed with the letter was a financial gift, enough to pay off her rent for several months and allow her to transition into her new role without worry. Emily's hands trembled as she read the words again, struggling to believe what was in front of her. Was this real? Why her? What could someone like James Harrington possibly see in her? Her mind swirled with doubt. What if she wasn't good enough? What if this was all some elaborate prank? But beneath the fear, a spark of hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance she'd been dreaming of, a way to break free from the monotony of her life and do something meaningful. The next morning, Emily woke up with a mix of nerves and determination. After a sleepless night spent weighing her options, she had made her decision. She couldn't let this opportunity pass her by, no matter how intimidating it seemed. By noon, Emily stood outside Harrington Tower, the sleek glass skyscraper that housed James's company. The building was a far cry from the diner or her modest apartment. Its modern architecture and bustling lobby exuded a sense of power and purpose. Emily felt out of place in her simple dress and flats, but she squared her shoulders and stepped inside. A friendly receptionist greeted her and directed her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless, her nerves growing with every passing second. When the doors finally opened, Emily stepped into a sprawling office space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. James stood near his desk, reviewing a set of documents. When he saw her, he smiled warmly and gestured for her to come in. "Emily," he said, his tone welcoming, "I'm glad you're here." She approached cautiously, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "I read your letter," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I still don't understand why you chose me." James set down his papers and looked at her with quiet intensity. "Because you have something that can't be taught. Empathy. You see people. Emily, you see their struggles, their humanity. That's the kind of perspective this foundation needs." Emily hesitated, doubt creeping in. "But I don't have the experience. I'm just a waitress. And that's exactly why you're the right person for this," James said firmly. "You've lived it. You understand what it means to struggle, to want something better. That makes you more qualified than most people sitting in these offices." For a moment, Emily was silent, her mind racing. Then, with a deep breath, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'll do it." James smiled, his expression one of genuine satisfaction. "Welcome aboard, Emily." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Emily's days at the diner were replaced by long hours at Harrington Enterprises, where she dove headfirst into her new role. The work was challenging, often overwhelming, but James was a patient mentor. He guided her through every task, teaching her the skills she needed and encouraging her to trust her instincts. As Emily settled into her new life, she began to see the impact of her work. Whether it was organizing funding for a local shelter or creating programs to support single mothers, every project carried the potential to change lives. For the first time, Emily felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. But the most unexpected part of her new role was the bond she began to form with James. He was more than just her boss. He was someone who believed in her, who saw her not as a waitress, but as a person with potential. Their shared lunches and late-night conversations became moments of connection that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself growing, not just as a professional, But as a person, she had taken a leap of faith, and for the first time in her life, it felt like she was truly living. The transformation in Emily Hart's life was nothing short of extraordinary. Just a few weeks ago, she had been a waitress at the Cornerstone Diner, her world confined to its faded booths and familiar faces. Now, she spent her days working alongside James Harrington, collaborating on projects that had the power to change lives. It was exhilarating, overwhelming, and, at times, deeply intimidating, but Emily thrived. James was a patient mentor, offering guidance without ever making her feel small. He encouraged her ideas, even when she doubted herself, and celebrated her victories, no matter how small they seemed. Over late nights spent poring over proposals and budgets, Emily discovered a side of herself she hadn't known existed: confident, capable, and deeply passionate about helping others. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside the vast windows of James's office, Emily and James sat together, reviewing a proposal for a new community initiative. The foundation planned to open resource centers in underserved neighborhoods, providing education, childcare, and job training. It was the kind of project Emily had only dreamed of being a part of, and now she was helping to shape it. "You've done incredible work on this," James said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "The way you've structured the outreach programs, it's exactly what we need." Emily blushed, ducking her head. "I've had a lot of help," she said modestly. James leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "Do you know why I chose you, Emily?" She looked up, surprised by the sudden change in his tone. "Because I gave a boy half a sandwich?" James chuckled softly. "It's more than that. You have a way of seeing people, not just their needs, but their potential. You remind me that change starts with compassion, and that's something even the best credentials can't teach." Emily's heart swelled at his words, but she couldn't shake the lingering doubt. "Sometimes, I feel like I don't belong here," she admitted. "Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." James's expression softened. "I used to feel the same way when I started out. Success can be lonely, and it's easy to feel like an outsider. But you're not pretending. Emily, you've earned your place here." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the city stretched out before them. Emily realized how much James had come to mean to her, not just as a mentor, but as someone who truly saw her, who believed in her potential when she couldn't see it herself. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and James's bond deepened. Their partnership was built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the foundation. But beneath the professional connection lay something more profound. Their late-night conversations drifted from work to life, to dreams and fears they hadn't shared with anyone else. One evening, after the successful launch of the community initiative, James invited Emily to dinner to celebrate. The restaurant was elegant but understated, a place where the hum of conversation and the soft glow of candles created an intimate atmosphere. Emily wore a simple dress, her nerves humming as she stepped into the dining room. James stood to greet her, his smile warm and genuine. "You look stunning," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you," Emily replied, her cheeks flushing. "This feels surreal." "It's well-deserved," James said as they sat her down. "You've worked so hard to make this happen." As the evening unfolded, their conversation flowed easily, weaving between lighthearted banter and moments of heartfelt reflection. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to relax completely in his presence, her usual insecurities fading away. Toward the end of the meal, James set down his glass and looked at her with a quiet intensity. "Emily, there's something I need to say." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "You've changed my life," he said simply. "Not just the work we've done together, but the way you've reminded me of what really matters. Your kindness, your determination, it's inspired me in ways I can't put into words." Emily felt her breath catch. "James, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me, not just as a colleague, but as a person." Tears pricked at the corners of Emily's eyes. She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as it met his. "You've changed my life too," she said softly. "You've shown me that I'm capable of so much more than I ever thought possible." In that moment, the world outside the restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, connected by the shared journey that had brought them here. The following months brought new challenges and triumphs. The foundation's initiatives continued to grow, reaching communities across the city and beyond. Emily stepped into her role with newfound confidence, becoming a leader who inspired those around her with her empathy and vision. And through it all, her relationship with James flourished. What had begun as a professional partnership blossomed into a deep, abiding love, one built on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. One crisp autumn evening, as they stood on the rooftop of Harrington Tower, James took Emily's hand and looked out at the city lights with her. "You've come so far," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I hope you see that now." Emily smiled, her heart full. "I do. And it's because you believed in me." James turned to her, his eyes shining with affection. "You've always had it in you, Emily. You just needed someone to remind you." As they stood together, the cool breeze ruffling their hair, Emily realized how far she had come, from the waitress who dreamed of something more to the woman who had found her place in the world. And with James by her side, she knew the journey was only just beginning.